To discuss that further, we're joined by Danielle Lazare, journalist and author, joining us live from New York, and also Life Malcolm, a civil rights activist, joining us from Tampa, Florida. Mr. Lazare, we keep hearing about these gun violence incidents in which people are killed, innocent children, which obviously have nothing to do with anything that shooter has in mind, are being killed and targeted. What is stopping Congress from placing some gun control laws? I do understand the importance of allowing people to carry weapons according to the U.S. Constitution, but shouldn't there be some kind of control over it?
Yes, you're obviously correct. There should be some kind of control. But the U.S. Constitution is a huge problem. America is falling apart. And the reason it's falling apart is it has a 235-year-old Constitution, which is simply unchangeable. And this Constitution is grossly at odds with the needs of modern society. And the gun question is a good example of this. The Second Amendment essentially provides an unqualified right for Americans to own guns. And it makes gun control impossible. So while any kind of reasonable utilitarian standard would suggest that something should be done to rein in guns. I mean, after all, the killer in Uvalde purchased two assault rifles just days before the killing. The killer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, today, I think it was yesterday, I'm sorry, purchased his gun on the same day that he carried the shooting out. There are no questions, no qualifications, no licensing requirements whatsoever. There should be, obviously, but the Constitution, which is unchangeable and is 235 years old, makes any kind of effective gun regulation impossible. So it's a triumph of law, unchangeable law, over utility. And it's completely mad. And there's nothing that Americans can do about it under present circumstances, short of overthrowing the entire structure. And that essentially involves a revolution. So America is falling apart quite rapidly. It's in a state of emergency, and there is no way out of this bind.
Mr. Malcolm, in your opinion, are there any ways to somehow control this? Well, according to the Second Amendment, yes, people do have the right to own weapons, at least somehow control the type of weapons that people can purchase.
Sure. You know, they make whatever laws they want to make. Just want to correct a couple of things. Number one, I'm not a civil rights activist. I'm a revolutionary. I'm a member of the African People's Socialist Party, a member of the African working class. And the guest is right. It's going to take a revolution to overturn this thing. This idea that the problem is the Constitution. The Constitution has never been fit for anybody but colonizers, people who go around the world snatching the resources, both human and material, of other people and exploiting those resources for the benefit of the colonizer. The United States government doesn't care about the Constitution. The guns, the violence that we see, the culture of violence that exists in America is not a consequence of some disregard for the Constitution or some regard for the Constitution. Actually, it's a consequence of disregard for the Constitution. America is a dictatorship. It rules without regard for law. It doesn't care anything about the law. The United States government does what it wants to do when it benefits the United States government. The reality is, it doesn't. The problem in this country isn't the lack of gun control. If you ask me, the problem is the too much gun control. Every gun control law that's come out since the 1800s, post emancipation, if you will, in 1865, was a gun law designed to restrict colonized people from being able to defend themselves against colonial violence. And so you have people like this guy in Tulsa who who has no fear of using gun violence the way he's seen the American soldiers do it. Even in cartoons like G.I. Joe, America, the United States, is the greatest purveyor of violence, and gun control is not the solution. Gun control is the problem. And because if those people at that doctor's office had been able to be, had been able to have arms and be in a position to protect themselves, the thing might have resulted differently. Even with the person who shot these 21 people in the school in Texas, where you can open carry, people should have been armed. The reality is, America, because of colonial capitalism, is in a constant state of war. We are in a constant state of war. Whether you're talking elections or whether you're talking gun violence on the streets. So politics is war without bloodshed, and war is politics with bloodshed. And so we are in a constant state of war because of colonial capitalism. Everybody ought to be armed. We don't need to have gun control. We need to have more guns and a better ability to defend ourselves against these maniacs who attack us in the street.
Well, that was quite controversial, Mr. Lazar. Before I go to some social media reactions, would you want to respond to that very shortly?
More guns is not the answer. That's completely backwards. Americans now have 400 million guns, privately owned guns, for a population of 330 million people. It's insane. And these guns are not making us safer. They're making things more dangerous. And every other government, every other democratic government, even countries with similar history, have no trouble dealing with this problem. And the US is the only exception. And clearly the problem is a profound breakdown in American government.
Okay, let's take a look at some social media reactions regarding this story. So here we have DJ saying that the latest mass shooting at a hospital shows that we are unable to control people with guns. Current gun controls are ineffective. Who suffers? The victims and their families, and all of us. Stop gun violence by having better laws. There are too many bad people. His Dolliness says this is laughable. Mass shooting after mass shooting in the U.S. and no movement towards banning guns. Gun sales increase after every one of these mass shootings, and the share price of Smith Wesson rose 7% in one day after the massacre in Texas of fourth graders killing children is great for gun trade. And James Futrell says another day, another preventable mass shooting. The U.S.'s inaction on hashtag gun control is absolutely deplorable. My heart breaks for every single victim of gun violence, those who should still be alive and their loved ones struggling to comprehend the senseless loss of life. Sandra Duffy says it is the U.S. Another mass shooting will come along tomorrow, so unless there are a very large number of victims who are remarkable in some way, like being children or targeted for their race, it's just another day in America. Okay, so Mr. Malcolm, you actually pointed to something which I was wondering about. Basically, when you mentioned that you need more guns in the U.S. For us, outside the U.S., this is not comprehensible. I'm wondering whether gun violence has its roots in American culture, maybe the video games that children play, the movies, the Hollywood movies that are filled with violent scenes, and maybe this boils down not just to gun control, but the lack of actually gun control, but maybe to the way people are brought up, children are brought up in the U.S., thinking that this empowers them.
So first, just as a point of clarity, I did not say that we need more guns in the U.S. What I said is we need more people to have guns in the U.S. And I mean that it's not a small distinction. The United States government has disarmed colonized people, and a felon can't possess a weapon, and even back in the 1800s, as I mentioned before, if you were an enslaved person, you couldn't have a firearm. So, like, America has systematically disarmed colonized people, which has made colonized people like myself, African people, black people colonized in these United States borders, vulnerable to the aggression of white people and colonizers. And I understand that the guest, disagrees, no problem. Because he lives a white experience. I live an African colonized experience. And what I'm saying is, if we're gonna do gun control in the U.S., it should start with the police. Disarm the police, the domestic military of the United States. Disarm the police, the Sheriff's Department. Let's everybody. We can all do hand to hand and see how we fare. I'm fine with that. We can eliminate all the guns, but don't just take guns from the colonized people and our people who are poor and call it gun control. The issue is it's not video games, what have you. It's capitalism. Colonial capitalism turns men into beasts. It makes men fight each other over a morsel of food, fight each other over $1 or $2. That's what colonial capitalism does. We have to overturn that whole social system, that whole colonial mode of production, as O'Malley used to tell us says. We have to overturn that colonial mode of production, and it will eliminate all this stuff: the gun violence, the homeless crisis, the predatory lending, the food deserts. All that stuff is tied to colonial capitalism. But political power comes from the barrel of the gun, and that's the reason why the United States spends $880 billion on making sure they have guns, because they know that political power comes from that barrel of that gun, those guns.
So, Mr. Malcolm, are you in a way implying that it is more difficult for African Americans or maybe Asian Americans to purchase guns compared to white people?
No, I'm not implying that at all. No, I'm not implying that at all. What I'm saying explicitly is that the United States government makes it more difficult for Africans and other colonized people to possess them, legally possess them. I mean, you can get a gun on the street. I can go down the street right now and buy a gun, I promise you. But the question is whether I can possess it legally. And so when the police stopped me because I was walking down the street, with a Gatorade, that was open, and they thought they said it was liquor, or I rode my bicycle down the wrong way or something. Now I have a gun on me that I didn't have the legal right to possess. Now, I'm facing felony charges of carrying a concealed weapon and what else they might levy on me. So the United States government has made it difficult. I mean, it's this litany of law. I mean, anybody can Google it. Just Google gun control laws and black people, and you'll see this whole litany of laws aimed at disarming African people in the United States. And the reason why is because the colonial domination that exists in the United States requires the most brutal, vicious kind of violence that we see every day played out. And sometimes, guys like this person in Tulsa who went and shot people mimic the behavior, the colonial conduct of the colonizers. But the primary contradiction, the primary problem is the colonial violence that exists because of colonial capitalism that turns men into beasts.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lazar, we're running out of time. We have about 3 minutes left, and I still have 2 questions to ask from you. So let's do that very quick. By what Mr. Malcolm just said, what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there already exists some kind of control, maybe over African Americans or Asian Americans who want to purchase guns. Why can't this kind of control be applied to other people in the U.S.?
No, there are no race-specific controls. What the other speaker was referring to is in the 1860s and 70s, when ex-slaves were left defenseless against the Ku Klux Klan, white terrorism. Slaves obviously needed means of protection to fend off these really bloody, violent attacks. But the answer is not individual gun ownership. The answer is democracy. Better democracy, more effective democracy. The idea that the people should be stymied by a 235-year-old law that they have no power to change is an absurdity. It's completely ridiculous.
So,
And
Mr.
yet
Lazar,
that is actually the fact. I'm sorry.
we're running out of time. I have one more question to ask you.
Yeah, please.
I would like to know, well, considering the given circumstances in the U.S. and a constitution that you can't change, what is the reason for the rise in such violence? Is it because of, like I said, maybe movies that children are watching, the way they're being brought up, or video games? What does this kind of violence, especially when we see small children being targeted, people in hospitals who have clearly done nothing wrong, being targeted?
Listen, Canadian kids play the same silly, violent video games, and shootings are a fraction of what they are in the U.S. Okay, so that's not how kids are brought up. It's a legal climate which makes it possible to purchase military weapons on the spot without any questions asked, and clearly that's inspiring these copycat killings, where it's now becoming, a fad, one might almost say, to go out and buy a gun and blow away people whom one doesn't like. I mean, there are a lot of people I don't like, but I'm not going to go out and get a gun and blow them away. But clearly, this is becoming a growing trend in the U.S., and it's completely and utterly insane. And yes, of course, it is connected to U.S. military policies and violence in America, but it's really a democratic breakdown that we're seeing here.
Well, thank you very much. Daniel Lazare, journalist and author from New York, and Life Malcolm, as you said so yourself, a revolutionist from Tampa, Florida. Thank you very much for sharing your views and thoughts with us, and thanks to all of our viewers for following this edition of the News Review.